What actually stops a paladin from coating their sword in Black Lotus extract? Why did the Assassin's Guild control the poison trade instead of letting just anyone with the coin buy it? And why, of every weapon in the game, is this the one you are most likely to accidentally use on yourself? I went digging through every core rulebook, every Dungeon Master's guide, and a stack of old Dragon magazine issues to answer those questions properly. And what I found was a system that's been quietly rewritten and rebalanced across 4 decades of editions, from flat hit point tables to full delivery method classifications, each version trying to solve the same problem. How do you let poison exist in the game without letting it break everything else? So, settle back, grab yourself a tasty beverage, check it carefully. It's time to get deeply nerdy. This is the complete guide to poisons in D&D. Poison from the earliest rulebooks onward carries a moral charge that very few other forms of damage in the game quite match. Looking at you, necromancy and enchantment and transmutation. It's coded as dishonorable before a single die is rolled, and that coding shapes who's allowed to touch it, who gets punished for using it, and who the game assumes would stoop to using it in the first place. Good aligned characters bear the brunt of this, of course. A paladin who poisons a blade isn't making a tactical choice, they're risking their very alignment, their class features, everything that paladinhood is built on. The same goes for clerics who haven't tipped into evil themselves. The game doesn't stop you from doing it, it just makes sure you know that there's a cost, and that cost is spiritual as much as mechanical. Compare that to, say, a rogue sneaking up and driving a dagger into someone's kidneys, which the game treats as a perfectly acceptable Tuesday. The dagger's fine, the stuff on the dagger is the problem. Mechanically, this shows up as straightforward tax on outsiders to the practice. For most of the game's history, poison efficiency belonged almost exclusively to one class, and if you weren't that class and tried to use poison anyway, your victim got a saving throw bonus for your trouble. Most argue this penalty is just a lack of training on how to deliver it in the most effective way, but it can also be viewed as a sort of a bad karma thing. These two are not mutually exclusive. And then there's the practical downside, which might be the funniest piece of game design in this entire topic. Every time you apply poison to a weapon, there's a flat 5% chance you poison yourself instead. Roll a natural 1 on an attack with a poisoned blade, and now you're rolling a save to avoid becoming your own victim. You can be a stone-cold murderer with zero qualms about staying good and still get killed by your own dagger because you fumbled the application. This combination of specialist and restricted training, the moral stigma, plus possible self-harm risk is why a poison in D&D is never a mainstream player option. It was designed to belong to somebody specific. And that brings us to who that somebody actually was. So who actually got to use this stuff without penalty? The answer for most of D&D's history is assassins. And not in a loose thematic sense. The Assassin's Guild controlled the poison trade in the way real-world cartels control drug supply chains. If you wanted poison and you weren't an assassin yourself, your options were limited. Thieves and magic users could get their hands on small amounts of the weaker stuff, but only by paying monthly fees to the guild. Money the guild used to secure itself political power by any means required. More than any other, assassins' guilds often fronted as thieves' guilds or mercenary organizations, military or private armies, and yes, certainly an adventurers' guild, one that could afford expensive bribes and make a lot of offers that officials couldn't refuse, if you know what I mean. Individual assassins, meanwhile, weren't manufacturers. That's a detail people tend to dismiss, since it seems like it should be their whole thing, right? The class was generally forbidden from brewing its own poisons, which meant even that people whose entire identity revolved around poison blades still had to go through guild artisans or through a black market alchemist to get their supplies. But usually it's less seek out the lone wizard concocting poisons and toxins in a tower, and more I'm a career hitman with reputation who has a guy supplying me and a bunch of secretive specialists supplying him. What assassins did get that nobody else did was training efficiency, and progression. As they leveled up, they could specialize into different poison behaviors, something that killed you instantly, or something that took its time working through the system, or something that built up cumulatively with repeated exposure. There's also a shelf life built into all of this that rarely gets talked about. Blade venom, that kind smeared directly onto a weapon, degrades fast. Full strength on day 1, half strength on day 2, gone entirely by day 3. And it loses potency further with every successful hit that lands. You can't stockpile a poison dagger and expect it to still be lethal a week later. The decay curve is part of why the Assassin's Guild monopoly actually held together in the fiction. Poison isn't a permanent upgrade you slap on once, it's a consumable with an expiration date, which means the supply chain matters constantly, not just at the moment of purchase. A good aligned character seeking to make use of poisons is getting involved with an infrastructure of evil individuals, an organization with its own rules, dues, and reasons for keeping do-gooders' noses out of its business. It's not like the rule against good aligned characters using poison is arbitrary. It's just not fully explained as an in-world social dynamic clearly enough, so players may just assume that they can buy it as easily as medical supplies or other special equipment, unaware of all the complex social ramifications involved and why suppliers wouldn't sell it to them even if they could afford it. Not every guild kept its formulas anonymous, however. The Fire Knives, an assassin's guild out of South Faerun, had a signature poison of its own, Paranox, a cinnamon-scented contact toxin they coated their blades with, as something close to a calling card. One vial of it, looted off a dead fire knife assassin, ended up in the hands of a halfling bard named Olive Rustkettle, who used it in the single boldest poison play in the realm's history, threatening to drink it in front of a red dragon mid-negotiation, then throwing the vial directly into the dragon's open mouth during the fight that followed. The dragon nearly died. So did the entire poison as a coward's weapon framing in that one afternoon. So, in the end, poison stayed exactly where the earliest designers seemed to want it. Rare, regulated, and morally loaded. Those suppliers are where the alchemists come in, but before we get into who actually makes this stuff, it's worth pausing on how the game measured it, because the math behind poison changed more dramatically across editions than almost any other kind of damage in D&D. The earliest system was refreshingly blunt. Poisons were ranked on a letter scale running from AA up through J, and each letter corresponded to a flat amount of extra hit point damage, starting at under 6 points at the bottom and climbing to somewhere between 91 and 100 at the top. Above that sat two special ratings that broke the pattern entirely. X delivered 10 hit points of damage every round until the victim died, a slow bleed out rather than a single hit, and XX skipped the math altogether and just killed you outright. There was also the S rating for poisons that function like a sleep spell a couple of rounds after contact, which tells you the letter scale wasn't purely about damage. It was really a rough shorthand for how bad this is going to be, with lethality and incapacitation sitting in the same scale as if they were interchangeable outcomes. The system was simple to run at the table, but tells you almost nothing about what's actually happening inside the victim's body. A poison rated at, say, F just does F amount of damage. It doesn't care whether it's from a snake bite or a contaminated meal or a coated blade. The fiction and the mechanics aren't talking to each other. Later editions replaced that with something far more granular, organizing poisons first by how they entered the body rather than how much they hurt. Ingested poisons mixed into food or drink with long onset times stretching anywhere from 2 to 20 rounds, slow enough that a poisoner needed patience and access rather than combat opportunity. Insinuative poisons, the blade venoms smeared onto weapons, which they decay curve we already covered, full strength one day and gone the next by 3. Contact poisons, triggered by touching unbroken skin, favoured for traps on coins, doorknobs and locks, where the victim poisons themselves simply by picking the wrong thing up. And poisonous gas, a liquid that turned into an aerosol on contact with air, filling a 5-foot cube and catching everyone standing in the wrong spot. That's a genuinely different way of thinking about the threat. Instead of asking how much does this poison hurt, the game started asking how does this poison actually reach you, which meant the method of delivery carried real tactical weight. The contact poison on a doorknob is a completely different kind of danger than an insinuative poison on a dagger, even if the underlying toxin is chemically identical, because one requires the victim to make a mistake and the other requires someone to actively use it against them. Later still, the math shifted again, this time towards something closer to the DC-based ability damage systems familiar to more modern editions. Poison started dealing direct damage to specific ability scores, strength, constitution, dexterity, rather than generic hit points, and those saving throws got tied to a difficulty class specific to each individual poison rather than a flat universal number. This version of the system also split off a fourth delivery category, injury, distinct from contact, covering everything that had to enter through an actual wound rather than through unbroken skin. That's a distinction the earlier delivery method system hadn't bothered making. Touching a poisoned coin and getting stabbed by a poison dagger were treated as fundamentally different threats for the first time. Each system solved a problem the previous one created. The letter grade system was simple but disconnected from fiction. The delivery method system fixed that by grounding poison in how it actually reached a victim, but still measured severity in a fairly abstract way. And the ability damage system went further still, making poison feel less like generic damage and more like an actual assault on a specific part of what makes a character function, draining their strength, their toughness, or their coordination, rather than chipping away at an undifferentiated pool of hit points. Okay, back to the mad scientists. Alchemists are the ones who actually turn raw venom and rare ingredients into something a professional can rely on. And due to the field operative focus of Dungeons & Dragons, it's a shame the specific specialist doesn't get the attention they really deserve. But if you have a campaign set somewhere like Waterdeep or even the world city of Ravnica, you could craft a campaign where guilds and specialist materialist wizards like alchemists are truly the most adventurous scholars. Alchemists are not made up of those without the aptitude for spellcasting. They need genuinely exceptional intelligence to even qualify, on top of solid wisdom, dexterity, and constitution. Those with a talent for handling exotic materials and problem solving seem to gravitate towards this profession, and any wizard with a shred of wisdom gives them the respect they deserve. After all, when a wizard runs out of spells, what's the first thing they turn to? Scrolls. And what are scrolls made from? Special materials made by alchemists, as are the potions, elixirs, and wondrous items that save their lives on too many occasions to mention. Alchemy is not science. It's not just medieval chemists. They master a broad range of very difficult disciplines, from ecology and biology to cosmology and metallurgy. It takes decades of training with a lot of risk involved. Every time an alchemist sits down to compound something new, there's a real chance of failure tied directly to their intelligence score. And failure in this context wasn't just wasted ingredients. Minor mistakes could trigger small explosions right there in the workshop. Major mistakes could produce something actively dangerous, like an elixir of madness, or a cloud of dusters sneezing and choking. I think most of us love alchemists because their goal is absolute precision, but they have a well-deserved reputation for ambitious failures that result in poisoned labs, catastrophic explosions, unleashed chaos, and sewers lurking with foul, twisted mutations. Wizards get a lot of blame for what is mostly the failings of alchemists, but that's what you get dealing with rare and powerful stuff. Things grow extra eyeballs, hunger for human flesh, and then blow up occasionally. We like it that way. It's fun. Alchemists require adventurers with reputations for success, because they need very difficult to attain ingredients. We're talking phase spider venom, the eye stalk of a giant slug, the brain of a specific type of dragon. They don't have the time, and it would be stupid to risk all of their training and experience in a lab by going out hunting down rare things in remote, dangerous places themselves. So adventurers can find good, steady, dangerous work from alchemists as their bread and butter in between pure downtime and their next big dungeon crawl. It's probably what they were doing before they showed up to your campaign already at level 3 or 5. They were slogging through the stenchweed swamps, hunting blink wasps' nests for queen wasp venom or something. In the starting area, getting 20 knoll pelts to complete the starter quests, if you will. Not everything alchemists make is dangerous, of course. They start off crafting simple sleep powder brewed from poppy and chamomile, strong enough at a high dose to put a target down without killing them, but sold as dilute pills for the gentry and their fellow academics and artisans. Tranquilizer, made from hemlock and white lotus, induced lethargy rather than death. Truth powder did exactly what it sounds like. These are interrogation tools, crowd control tools, the kind of thing a city watch or a wealthy merchant might commission just as readily as an assassin would. Poison, in other words, wasn't the whole business. It was just the most dramatic branch of a much wider practice in altering what a body or mind could do. Also, the same knowledge of how to make these things includes knowledge of how to counter those effects. So they know the antidote to anything that they can concoct. It makes a lot of sense that they would not make something they could not counter or greatly restrict such things to only a select few. Not every recipe an alchemist keeps is meant to be countered though. The Lichny potion, the concoction an aspiring lich must drink to complete their transformation, is proof of how far the craft can be pushed past anything resembling responsible chemistry. Arsenic and belladonna distillate, infant blood taken under specific and horrifying circumstances, a simmered heart, ground reproductive glands from 6 giant moths, all combined in an extract sequence under a full moon. With less than 1 in 10 chance, the whole ritual simply kills the drinker outright, even when done correctly. It's seriously nasty stuff. For all the compounding and formulas alchemists bring to the table, most poisons don't start in a lab, they start in something that is alive. Venom glands, digestive secretions, toxic skin, the sap of some patient and vindictive plant. The rare exception is inorganic, arsenic being the obvious example, a mineral poison with no biology behind it at all, just slow accumulating damage from something the body was never built to process. But arsenic is the outlier and kind of boring for a fantasy game. There are plenty of others. The creatures themselves are where poison starts having personality, since every type comes with its own method, its own myth, and usually its own body horror. Snakes get the most real-world grounding of the bunch, and the sourcebooks clearly did their homework on actual herpetology before translating it into game terms. The Gaboon viper carries 2-inch fangs long enough to punch through light armor, and its venom works both ways at once, tearing through blood and nerves simultaneously. The black mamba is written as pure aggression, territorial and fast, with venom that keeps working as an anticoagulant even if you make your initial save, so surviving the bite doesn't mean you are actually fine. And the Bushmaster, the longest viper in the lineup, still leaves you with fever and vomiting for what sounds like a genuinely miserable few hours, even if you make the saving throw to survive its bite. On a side note, as a person who comes from one of the least venomous places on the earth, getting bitten by some tiny tree snake in the jungle and then dying from my insides turning into liquid and exiting via all my orifices is not something I want to risk, just to go take pretty pictures of a waterfall or something. We have plenty of epic scenery right here, thanks. Just don't eat random plants, pack something warm to wear and a nice box of sandwiches and you'll be just fine. But, on a fantasy world, you can have the stuff that only makes sense inside a fantasy ecosystem. The giant vampire frog delivers its dose through hollow needle-sharp teeth, which is already an unsettling image for something called a frog. Rough-skinned newts carry tetrodotoxin as in their skin and their eggs, potent enough to kill a grown human just from contact, which is actually lifted straight from real-world biology, since real rough-skinned newts are one of the most toxic amphibians on the planet. The game didn't need to invent anything there, it just imported the truth and let the fiction do the rest of the work. The Lucorn is probably the strangest entry on the list and my favourite for exactly that reason. It's an underdark predator whose digestive secretions get harvested by alchemists, not for poison at all, but to extend the duration of spells like invisibility and polymorph. That's a genuinely clever piece of design, a monster that's dangerous to fight but valuable to farm, which gives adventuring parties a reason to want it alive and cooperative rather than just dead, at least until the extraction process presumably stops being cooperative. As for named poison themselves, a handful show up again and again across editions as the benchmark toxins everyone measures against. Black Lotus extract sits near the top of the lethality scale, a contact poison that does serious damage on the initial hit and then does it again as secondary damage, which means touching the stuff wrong could genuinely end a character on the spot. Purple Worm Poison takes a different approach, draining strength immediately and then draining it further, which turns a fight into a slow physical unraveling rather than a straightforward countdown to 0 hit points. Drow Poison works differently again, since it's not really about damage at all. It's about taking someone out of the fight entirely by knocking them unconscious for hours, which fits the Drow's reputation for capture and interrogation over simple slaughter. And Carrion Crawler Brain Juice, extracted from one of the most famously gross Underdark monsters, causes paralysis rather than death, which is exactly what you expect from a creature whose entire hunting strategy depends on keeping its prey alive and immobile long enough to eat. Sleep poisons come from things that hunt by capturing. Paralytics come from things that eat slowly. Instant killers come from things that consume their prey on the spot or need to defend themselves aggressively. The venom fits the ecology, or at least it should do when designed well. As scary as biological poisons are, magic takes everything to the next level. It gives designers a shortcut around biology entirely. Water to Poison is the cleanest example of that shortcut. It's a spell tied to druidic and oriental adventures traditions that transmutes plain water into venom using nothing but a snake fang as a material component. It's a small spell with a genuinely destabilizing implication if you think about it for more than a second, since it means that anyone with access to divine magic or primal magic can bypass the entire economy built around this stuff. The offensive spells lean into the theatrical side of things rather than the practical. Venomous Volley fires a cone of fangs that doesn't just damage on contact, it actively degrades the target's future saves against poison, stacking disadvantage onto an already dangerous situation. Spitting Cobra is built around a focus snake, essentially a siphoning venom out of a live source and redirecting it as a ranged touch attack, which is a strange and specific bit of flavor, casting a spell through an actual snake like a conduit. Serpent Storm gives even further into the spectacle, summoning a literal rain of magical snakes that bite and poison anyone caught underneath it. And Snake Shield surrounds the caster with a barrier of spectral fangs that punish anyone who gets close enough to touch them. None of these are subtle. They're built for the kind of caster who wants poison to look as dramatic as it feels. Then there's the version that isn't cast by a wizard or druid at all. Goblin Shamans get their own sleep-inducing bite delivery, a poison via spider bite variant that folds the toxin into the creature's natural attack rather than requiring a separate spell slot, which tells you poison magic wasn't reserved exclusively for player-facing spellcasters. Monsters got their own supernatural shortcuts too. Magic items are a bit less flamboyant. The Dagger of Venom is probably the most iconic of the lot, a +1 weapon ready to inject a fatal dose on a critical hit or on command. This solves the shelf life problem Blade Venom always had, so they're highly prized and hard to come by. The Potion of Poison is a nastier piece of design since it's built entirely around betrayal. Illusion magic disguises it to look, smell, and taste exactly like something beneficial, so the victim drinks it willingly, and it delivers a serious upfront hit followed by reoccurring damage over time. And Dust of Sneezing and Choking sits in its own category of horrifying. It really needs a more alarming name, since failing the save against it causes immediate death. There's no partial effect. You fail the roll and this one kills you outright if you're unlucky. Posi-Toxin flips the entire premise of poison on its head. Distilled with holy water and laced with positive energy, it does to corporeal undead exactly what ordinary poison does to the living, breaking down bodies, disrupting whatever unholy animation is holding them together, while remaining completely harmless to anyone actually alive. It's proof the game eventually got serious about the other side of the equation. If poison is fundamentally an attack on living systems, what does the equivalent look like for something that's already dead? Where alchemists and assassins operate inside a regulated, rationed system, spells and enchanted items are much harder to control once created and unleashed. Even spell scrolls intended for one-shot emergencies can be copied and reproduced if they fall into the hands of another skilled mage. And alchemists are experts at reverse engineering a lot of the potions, salves, elixirs, tinctures, powders, canisters of gases and such that adventurers are always dumping on their lab benches and asking with great urgency, "Can you make an antidote for this? My friend is dying in the cart outside." Some poison is just terrain that will kill you if you're careless. Foraging goes wrong more often than most players assume. Wilderness survival guides make a point of warning that living off the land means occasionally grabbing the wrong plant, and the wrong plant doesn't always announce itself. Get it wrong, and you're looking at painful cramping and steady hit point loss turn after turn, which is a miserable way to learn a lesson that a ranger in the party could have taught you for free. Water carries its own danger. A waterhole out in the wild can be poisoned, and the game gives you actual environmental storytelling to catch it before you drink. There's no vegetation growing nearby, and worse, skeletal remains scattered around the edges. That's the game trusting its players to read a scene rather than just rolling a perception check, which is a nice touch. The corpse pile around the water is the warning label. The Underdark takes this even further because almost everything down there seems built to hurt you passively. Cave creeper fungus releases spores that induce what the sourcebooks call cave terrors, which is a wonderfully unsettling piece of flavor text for what's essentially a panic-inducing toxin growing on the cave wall. Wisp lichen is worse in a different way, trailing sticky strands that paralyze anything that brushes against them. Less a plant than a slow-motion trap built entirely out of patience, and in the more volcanically active stretches of the Underdark, geothermal gas vents can fill a chamber with poison that does steady damage every minute you're exposed, which means sometimes the deadliest thing in the dungeon rooms just isn't a monster at all, it's the air. What ties environmental poison together is that none of it wants anything from you. It's not guarding treasure, it's not hunting, it's not being manufactured by an alchemist for profit, it's just there, indifferent, and the only real defense against it is paying attention. A handful of named poisons keep resurfacing across the sourcebooks and novels, and once you start pulling on that thread, a surprising number of them lead back to the same source, a single cursed spell book called the Nathlum, compiled sometime in the 10th century Dale Reckoning by an orc mage named Leth Chauntos. It's at least 10 separate poisons trace their origin to that one book. Belfren, a luminescent blue acid that only harms flesh and soft tissue, Dwarf Bane, lethal specifically only to dwarves, so precisely targeted that Duergar and the Underdark are completely immune to it, and coat their traps with it accordingly. Hold, which works on anything except demi-humans and humans. Jeti, which kills all sensation of pain for several minutes on its way to killing you, making it useful as a battlefield anesthetic right up until it isn't. Lurdas, also called the Yellow Death, which eats through internal organ tissue within moments of ingestion. Orvas and Varacas, both selective toxins that only affect mammals, with Orvas doubling as the antidote to Varacas if administered in time. Ulcron, which dissolves tendons, ligaments, and cartilage on contact. Prespra, or Mother's Bane, effectively only against humans and incompatible with dairy. And Midnight Tears, brewed from hellwasp corpses and tar, engineered to do nothing at all until the stroke of midnight, so a victim can be poisoned in a crowded room hours earlier and nobody will know until it's far too late to matter. Lechstontos' family was murdered by a rival orc priest, a detail that only came to light centuries later, well into the 1500s Dale Reckoning. Somewhere in Faerun, a dwarf is still dying from a formula an orc wrote out of grief for what happened to his own long ago. Not everything worth mentioning here comes from one book though. Calling, a drow poison, might be the most unsettling single entry on this entire list. It's a paste made from magically binding aboleth mucus with spider eggs, disguised in food well enough that only a trained cook would notice anything wrong. Eat it, and a swarm of spiders hatches inside your stomach. Making a single dose requires actual poisonous skill plus a summon swarm spell, which places it in the strange category all its own. It's not a natural toxin, not quite an alchemical one, a fully engineered magical weapon built to horrify as much as kill. Yarberry runs in the opposite direction entirely. It's deadly red berry native to Thay, harmless while unripe, and then it turns a vivid striking red exactly as it becomes lethal. That colour is so recognisable that Thayans started using Yarberry as a byword for a particularly beautiful shade of red, which might be the only case in the entire realms of the poison leading its name to beauty instead of fear. Something can be gorgeous and be actively trying to kill you, and Thay apparently just leaned into that rather than fighting it. And then there's Rock Stinger, extracted from an ugly venomous fish favoured by the assassin Barbarous the Grey in the mid-15th century. A single nick from a rock stinger's coated blade causes agonising scream-inducing pain followed by muscle contractions and vomiting, and Barbarous once used it purely as intimidation, inflicting it on a helpless restrained guard for no reason beyond making a point to the guard's employer. It's said to be one of the only times something close to regret crossed the face of an otherwise thoroughly ruthless killer, which tells you plenty about both the poisons and the man. But there's more of this than any one video could ever cover properly. A poison from Zakara that makes a victim crumble to dust, actual dust on contact, favoured by an order of assassins called the Wind of Fate. A drow venom smuggled into a magical shield in the ruins of Mithranor, a plant so addictive and so lethal that by late 1300s it had nearly poisoned itself out of existence in the wild. An order of Yuan-Ti oils burned and inhaled in dedicated basking chambers, banned outright by the lords of Waterdeep once the nobility started dying from their own habit. A tribe of lizard folk who worship their god through a poison so sacred their chieftain refused to share the recipe even with adventurers who saved his life. A flower so fragrant that travellers mistake the lightheadedness of poisoning for the feeling of falling in love. Every one of these has a full write-up, source and story behind it, along with the other 100+ named poisons of Faerun in the companion document for this video. Every entry researched individually, sourced properly, built to sit open on a second tab while you're prepping a session. The full compendium document is on my Substack. If you want it and any future guides like it sent straight to you, that's what Substack's for. Come find me on Discord if you've got questions, disagreements, or just want to talk D&D lore with people who take it as seriously as I do. And if you want to support the channel directly, there's a shop link for that too. Keep an eye on that, as I'm going to be adding some of my own artwork to some garments that you can buy. Faerun's own scholars had the same idea as it happens. Somewhere before the Year of the Serpent, appropriately, someone in the realms itself sat down and wrote a book called Poisons and Known Antidotes, cataloguing exactly this kind of information for the people who needed it. A copy of it turned up centuries later, still readable in the accursed tower of Icewind Dale. So this isn't a new idea, it's just the same one, done again for a slightly different kind of adventurer. My name is AJ Pickett, your sage of Candlekeep, the Deckard Cain of D&D, expert on the imaginary, master of monsters. As always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.